Darius Toney have any trick plays left up his sleeve? We're going to find out here on the Football Guys DFS show. We have all your cash and GPP plays for this week's main slate. We're joined in, as always, with Evan Knotts and with Phil Alexander. We're going to lay it out. I'm going to start with Phil. Phil, can you lay out the games of the week for this week?
Sure. There's a shorter list, I think, than usual. There's two marquee games on the slate. One of them is Commanders at Rams. Rams favored by 6.5, 50.5 point total. We're going to hope that our Rams don't fail us this week because I like a lot of them. There's Cowboys at Bills is the other one. That one is projected much closer by Vegas. Bills -1.5, and it's got that same 50.5 point over under. After that, you've got the 49ers side of 49ers at Cardinals. That game has a 47.5 point total, but the 49ers are massive favorites. And then I've got one other game called out as somewhat interesting, and that's Tampa Bay at Green Bay, with the Packers favored by 3.5 points over under 41.5. But if we're looking at games to stack, that was about all I'm interested in. Curious to know if you guys have your eyes on any others.
Yeah, it's tricky this week. I think that there's pieces here and there. I think this Browns, like I said, I've been saying the last several weeks now, the Browns are a fake team, and they gave up 27 to Jacksonville, and their offense looks pretty decent. So could Justin Fields and the Bears have a big day? And then Joe Flacco looks competent. So that game, weather dependent, it's in Cleveland in December, could be back and forth a little bit. The Browns are down both of their starting safeties. So I think that could be intriguing. But yeah, I mean, there's a number of games where you just simply cross them off your list. I want no part of Atlanta versus Carolina or either side of that, except maybe one guy who we'll talk about later. Houston versus Tennessee, depending on CJ Stroud's health, that'll be a big one there. Kansas City versus New England, no thank you. There's just, and then anybody facing the Jets, I really don't want to take either. And Tyreek Hill's less than 100%. So we're gonna talk players. I don't know how long we're gonna go, but it's a bad slate this week.
Yeah, it's one of those that we have more premier teams, it feels like, than in most slates, but the Chiefs offense has been struggling. The Dolphins match up with the Jets, and I think you guys did a great job laying out the games to look at. First, before we move forward, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. Feel free to comment with your questions on this week's slate, and we'll get in there and we'll try to help you out. We're going to go with our cash game plays now. And Devin, who are you leading off at quarterback on your cash game lineup?
I think there's two guys you can go with. I think it's either Matt Stafford, who I'm going with, or it's Josh Allen. I don't see a lot of justification for anybody lower. We were talking before the show, the Joe Flacco discount is gone. Unfortunately, he's 5,500 now. Still not a terrible price for GPPs, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, but it's still 38-year-old Joe Flacco. The Rams were really encouraging last week, and both Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua had big games for the first time in quite some time. So I do like that. And then Washington's basically a stardom if you got them type matchup. They're allowing 296 passing yards per game since week 4 and a staggering 2.6 passing touchdowns per game. So they're clearly the worst pass defense in the league, and how motivated they still are, I don't know. But I think it's Stafford for me. I do like the Josh Allen play a little bit. Dallas's defense over the last couple of weeks has been struggling against opposing quarterbacks, but look, he's probably just too expensive because we're going to talk about other plays at other positions and try and get up to that those elite players.
Phil, are you going to try to convince us to play Zach Wilson, or you got other direction you're going to go?
Certainly have another direction that I'm going to go. For me, there was 3 guys in cash games. Stafford certainly one of them for all of the reasons that Devin laid out. He's not the guy that I currently have plugged into my placeholder cash game lineup, and that's because I'm going to have at least 2 other Rams in my cash game lineup. I just like them better than Stafford from a floor and ceiling perspective. And I feel like at that point, I might as well just like put, if I'm going to play Stafford, if I'm going to play Kyron Williams, if I'm going to play Nakua, I might as well put Terry McLaurin in there, make it a GPP lineup, put a couple of low-owned guys in there, and be on my way. So I want to spread it out a little bit. I can't get up to Josh Allen as much as I'd like to. So my other two guys are Jordan Love at 6,200. Feels a little weird to call him a cash game play, but prior to last week against the Giants, and by the way, the Giants have been playing really good pass defense over the last 5 weeks. That one game that Dak Prescott threw for 400 yards against them, notwithstanding. But otherwise, they've been playing good pass defense. So I don't know that was all on Love. But before that, he was at least 23 DraftKings points in each of his last 3. Do you guys realize how good this Tampa Bay matchup is for Green Bay in that passing game? Like Arthur Smith looked at this matchup last week and he was like, Desmond Ridder, get in there and start ripping, pal. Like that's what happened.
I have it as the second best matchup of the week. So right behind the LA Rams versus Washington in our passing matchups. My only concern there is the health of Green Bay receivers. So Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, and Dontavian Wicks all might be out. And Love wasn't throwing downfield with Watson out last week. So I think it's a different team when Christian Watson is in the game. I'm fine with it if he plays, but they were averaging, I have it up somewhere. It's like 5.6 yards per attempt compared to a season average of 7.9 with Watson in. So it's a big difference if he plays because he does stretch the field so much. So that's my only thing.
Yep, that is a good point. For what it's worth, Reed and Wicks were both back at practice today, so I think we'll see them. And then my other guy was Brock Purdy. I mean, he's 6,800 now, but the man just doesn't stop having great matchups, throwing for 300 yards and multiple touchdowns, and costing significantly less than the other MVP caliber quarterbacks on the slate. If you could find the extra cap space, that's about as high as I was able to go and still come out with a cash game lineup that I felt comfortable with. I think the 49ers are obviously in a great spot as 12.5-point favorites against Arizona.
No, I like that Brock Purdy call quite a bit. I like the Matthew Stafford call as well. Phil does deserve some great credit. Phil was on the Desmond Ridder and Drake London stack last week, and Phil knocked that out of the park. That was a huge play last week. We're going to running backs, and Phil, you mentioned a Ram. I have an assumption that one of the Rams you mentioned is going to be in this running back group. But what's your running back group look like for cash game plays?
Yep, so it's Kyron Williams, as you alluded to. I mean, he had that one game where he came off of IR, and it looked like they were going to kind of ease up on his workload a little bit. But since then, he's right back to his like weeks 1 through 6 self, over 90% of the snaps, 80% of the Rams rush attempts over the last 2 games. And then you've got his red zone role, which is just insanity. And it's actually the reason why I'm a little bit hesitant on Matthew Stafford, because like, what if Kyron Williams just scores all of the touchdowns? I think that's very much in play. Cheap plug 2-hour data dominator, one of my favorite tools on footballguys.com. I was playing around there and it told me that Williams is tied for 3rd in red zone rush attempts and 2nd in red zone targets among running backs this season. And that's with the 4 games missed, right? So imagine what it could be. I just think he's in an incredible spot against that listless Washington defense. And then as excited as I am to play Williams is as unexcited as I am to play this next guy, but it's kind of like flossing your teeth or like stopping like for groceries on the way home from work when you really don't want to. It's just one of those things that you have to do. And I think you have to play Ezekiel Elliott at 5,800 this week. The man had 30 carries plus targets last week. And even if the 72 receiving yards that he had were an outlier, because that is a lot, I think we could pretty safely expect something like 5 catches and 40 yards because Bailey Zappi is in perpetual check down mode and New England should be trailing in this game. There's just no one else that they want to give touches to. and then I'll shut up. But the last guy that I want to mention is Christian McCaffrey. I just feel like every week I do like lineup gymnastics trying to get him into my lineup, and for like the last month, it really hasn't worked. He's been giving me these only 20-point games, which really don't work at his salary. And listen, like he could absolutely go for 40 points here against the Cardinals. I would say it's well within his range, but I look at the 2v2s and it's like I could play McCaffrey and Wan'Dale Robinson, or I could play, maybe like DJ Moore and Garrett Wilson. And I just feel a lot better about that second duo. So we'll talk about where the value is coming from and if you could get them in, but I've probably gone over my allotment at this point on cash game running back, so I'll hand it off.
Yeah, I'm playing Christian McCaffrey. I think the matchup's too good against Arizona. And my concern about Brock Purdy is Kyle Shanahan came out and basically said we have 2 MVPs on this team, and they should be able to do whatever they want against Arizona. It's narrative-y. That's even a word, which it's not. But look, he hasn't been all that great. And, he's been – well, I should say he's been good. He just hasn't been the Christian McCaffrey 30-plus point guy that you're going to want to play in. But he gives you a floor, and you know that going in. And, he's had 145 yards rushing last week and didn't score a touchdown. So he scores a touchdown on that, 2-yard line? It's a completely different story. So it was only his, 4th game of the season without a touchdown. What are the odds he has another one back-to-back without one? So I think he was minus 400 to score last week, which is crazy. I've never seen it that high. But I think he's going to be a lock for at least a touchdown, maybe multiple. This is a guy who scored 4 touchdowns in their first matchup. So if he scores that, or anywhere close, he's a guy that I'm going to want. With that, I'm probably not going Kyren Williams. I like the matchup, but I don't know that to Phil's similar point, I don't know that you can fit both comfortably. You can certainly do it with the Wan'Dale Robinsons or going cheap at tight end, but I don't know that I want to. I agree with Ezekiel Elliott, 13 targets over the last 2 games. Bailey Zappi's just trying to latch on as a career backup and not turn the ball over and just check the ball down and be competent. Beyond that, I think there's a couple guys. I think Saquon Barkley's in a really good spot with New York. The Saints' rush defense is certainly not what it's been over the past several years. And, they faced one of the easiest schedules on the season. But, even last week, Chuba Hubbard had 87 yards rushing. Miles Sanders had 74, so they're allowing 161 yards to Carolina. Maybe it's more of a GPP play, but I think it's certainly interesting. And then I kind of have to go cheap here if I'm going McCaffrey. And I don't know. I don't trust Breece Hall. I just can't do it. Bijan Robinson at 6,800, I think is I think I've told everyone to start running back against Carolina every week. They're just a bad. I mean, they're what's funny is they have one of the best pass defenses in the NFL, and it's only gotten better because J.C. Horn is back. But it's because teams aren't throwing the ball against them. They're throwing the second fewest times in the NFL. Only Cleveland has faced less pass attempts. And everyone is just running the ball because their offense is horrendous, and they can run the ball. So I think it's a game where Bijan Robinson continues to have success on the ground, and 6,800 is not a bad price.
Monitor the injury situation with Brian Robinson, and if he's out, I think Antonio Gibson at 5,200 becomes a great play. And Gibson might be a strong play anyways, and that might be more GPP, but I do think he becomes cash game viable if Brian Robinson is out. Another one, Chuba Hubbard is kind of gross, but at 5,600, he's kind of stepping into guaranteed volume. I believe he's been above 20 rushes each of the last 2 weeks. I think he might have been close to 100 yards each of the last 2 weeks too. So he probably is not going to get into the end zone, but that does kind of give you just kind of some little bit of points there, but I think Ezekiel Elliott at that pivot point is a better play there. But we'll move into wide receivers now. Devin, how are you building out your lineups on wide receivers?
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about it, but if Jaden Reed plays, I think he's a guy that you're going to want to target. So he's last week, 8 receptions, but he had just 27 yards. So, over the last 2 weeks, he's had 3.4 yards per attempt and 4.0, which I should be talking about fading this guy. But, look, he's getting volume. He had 10 targets over the last week. And at 4,900, I think he's at least intriguing. DJ Moore, I think, is in a really good spot going up against this Cleveland team. I talked about them being fake, and I continue to think that they're missing their top 3 safeties. So Grant Delpit is out. I believe he's placed on IR. Juan Thornhill's looking like he will miss, and then Rodney McLeod is already out. And then Denzel Ward just can't stay on the field. So with Justin Fields, DJ Moore's a completely different player, and 6,900 is just a little bit too cheap. It's risky. Drake London is another guy that I was targeting this week. So I talked a little bit about Carolina and the pass defense not being one that we want to target, but he has 7 or more targets in every game over his last, I believe, 7 games, except facing the Jets, in which the Jets completely took him out with Desmond Ridder. So we saw some struggle with Taylor Heineke as the starting quarterback, but with Ridder, they're really locking on to London. So I think he's a guy that it's at least intriguing.
Phil, do you have other plays that you're going with?
I do. Definitely agree with DJ Moore and Jordan Reed. I'm really impressed with Jordan Reed's high floor this season, in a season in which Jordan Love has been like a roller coaster. Reed has been pretty steady regardless of target volume or anything else. He finds a way to get into the box score. So I especially like him if Watson sits, which it looks like he will. Puka Nacua at 7,300. I feel like you want one of these Rams wide receivers in your lineup this week, and I'll save the 500 and go with the younger, fresher guy in Nacua as compared to Cooper Kupp. At least 7 targets in every game this season, and at this point we know that he's been historically productive for a rookie. I'm fully expecting something like 7 catches, 100 yards, and 50-50 shot at a touchdown from him in that matchup. And I might have mentioned Garrett Wilson at 5,800. He feels like point chasing a little bit since he's coming off of his best game of the season. And trust me, I've watched most of Zach Wilson's career dropbacks. It is incredibly unlikely that we're going to see another 300-yard passing performance from him this week. We're probably not going to see another 30 points from the Jets until he is out of town. But even with Wilson in past games before last week, you could pretty much set your clock to like 10 to 15 DraftKings points from Garrett Wilson. I think at $5,800, we just saw Will Levis and DeAndre Hopkins tear up the secondary on Monday night. I feel like he's probably should cost more in like the $6,500 range. So I think he's a solid value. And of course, with his talent, there is a little bit more upside.
Deebo Samuel, you talk about point chasing, but Deebo Samuel the last 2 weeks has been absolutely phenomenal at 7,700. He's not going to have probably receiving volume. If you're going to go to the very top, CeeDee Lamb at 9,200, I think is interesting in that Buffalo matchup. We've seen him kind of explode over the last couple of weeks, months, even now at this point. And then Devin had casually mentioned it, but Wan'Dale Robinson at 3,700, I think is a good way to kind of get some extra stuff into your lineup there at that low point. It might be a little bit risky still for cash games, but he looked really good last week on Monday night. And you kind of have that discount coming off Monday night, that pricing that wasn't adjusted with him playing that night. So those are all the only other ones that I'm looking at. One
more name I have that I wanted to mention is Amari Cooper, $6,000. I think one of you guys mentioned the production that he had 2 weeks ago before he went out. And then last week we saw he had 14 targets with Joe Flacco. So I think at 6K, he's clearly the top guy in Cleveland. And, to get 14, let's just say he gets 10 targets. The Bears have a very good run defense. Cleveland's going to struggle to run the ball. I think they're going to look to exploit the matchup against Chicago. Chicago just has a good defense in general, but Cooper at 6K, you could do worse.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let's go with tight ends. Devin, how are you going to build out tight end?
Cheaply. Look, it's Hunter Henry, I think, is at 3,200 is interesting. I don't want to do Ezekiel Elliott and Hunter Henry. That's the problem. But Bailey Zappi is just throwing to his tight ends and his running backs. We saw a little bit of Devontae Parker before he missed, and he's somewhat interesting at wide receiver if you had to go that way. But look, Tucker Kraft is probably the guy that I'm looking at. $3,000. This is bottom of the barrel type stuff, but to get a guy, he had 4 catches for 64 yards last week, facing a Tampa Bay defense that's not all that great against the pass, like we talked about. It's ugly, but I can't spend over 4,000. So like the Cole Kmets of the world or the David Njokus, which historically have been in that high 3 range, aren't there anymore. So I'm just going all the way down, I guess.
Phil, you have any other solutions for the position?
Yeah, it's going to be in that 3K range, like Devin said. The guys that I had my eye on besides Kraft were Chigakonkwo, 2,900, at least 5 targets and 8.5 DraftKings points in each of his last 3. It's like either Chig or Will Levis does something dumb every week that costs those two a big connection. But as long as the targets keep going his way, I feel like eventually they'll get there. The Texans have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to enemy tight ends adjusted for strength of schedule. So the matchup is there too. And Tyler Conklin is fine at 3,100. As long as Zach Wilson is his quarterback, Conklin seems to have mastered the 4 catch for 50-yard stat line. And I think you'd take that at 3,100.
Yeah, it's tough because Trey McBride is, I think, kind of juicy, but at 5,200, it's just really hard to get him into the lineup along with a difficult matchup against the 49ers. Before we move on, make sure to head to footballguys.com/plans to become a Hall of Fame subscriber. Hall of Fame subscribers get access to all DFS content for less than $20 monthly or $95 annually. Make sure to check that out. We have a lot of great content going up there. And as part of that, we're going to check out GPP plays. And I want to start off with Phil here on the quarterbacks. How are you going to differentiate on GPP plays?
Yeah, so this is definitely where you could play some correlated Dak Prescott and Josh Allen lineups and look to get different in some other spots. That is the game, I think, unquestionably, that we want to be targeting that has the most scoring potential. I mentioned Jordan Love for cash, and I don't think too many people are thinking that. So I think he's still going to be fine in tournaments as far as percent rostered and putting in like a Packers double or even triple stack. I don't think you're going to see much of that. So he's still good. And then the other name I have on my list is Kyler Murray. I think he's coming in at sub 5% on Devin's projections. And I think that's a way that you can stack San Francisco players and Trey McBride, whom we all like, but in a non-chalky way, and get a lineup together where you could get like 5 players in that game. And if Murray's the one who's 2%, we know that he's got the rushing upside. He's shaded a little bit coming off of that bye week, and before the bye, he had that rainy game in Pittsburgh that was low scoring, but I kind of like it this week. He's got Marquise Brown back, I think. Michael Wilson for the first time. We're going to see those two together. He's got McBride, and he's going to be needing to make plays if they're going to stay in that game. So I could see him running around a little bit.
Yeah, I'll look towards Justin Fields. I think that This game should be one through the quarterback position, and I think Chicago should be competitive in this game. Especially with no safety, like the safety issues with the Browns. I think it's a game in which they could have, Justin Fields could very easily have a big run or multiple big runs. It's very stackable with either Cole Kmet if you want to take advantage of the safety issues. I mean, Ronnie Hickman, who's a undrafted free agent from Ohio State, is going to be starting, and it's really hard to go undrafted from Ohio State because it seems like every player who's at least a starter gets drafted. So it tells you a little bit about what quality of player he's been this year. Sam Howell on the other side of Matt Stafford. I think Matt Stafford's going to be popular. We've seen, Sam Howell's coming off the bye week, so a lot of people forgot about him, and he had the bad Thanksgiving game before that. So he's a guy who can put up 300 yards and do it with relative ease. And we've seen the Rams struggle as of late. So, they've been winning big games, but they've been allowing, they allowed 316 yards and 3 touchdowns to Lamar Jackson. So, Lamar he's a great runner, but he hasn't been that great of a passer this year. So I do think Sam Howell is intriguing, at least on the other side of that game. I talked about Josh Allen. And then it's kind of it. Like, I don't know that I want to go with the, Joe Flacco at 55 could throw for 300 again. Like, I wouldn't put it past him, but probably not going that way.
I think narrative-wise, a lot of people, from what I've seen already, are going to be on Derrick Henry. And you've got Will Levis sitting there coming off a 320-yard performance against the Dolphins. Really a great performance at the end of that game to come from down 14. He's got that Monday night pricing at 5,400. And you're looking at that, you can stack him with DeAndre Hopkins and buy into the narrative of a revenge game of Hopkins against the Texans. And so that's, I think, the only other one that I would have on my list. That 5,400 allows you to... What's that?
What's the Henry narrative? I missed that.
It's just everybody, he goes nuts against the Texans, and everybody has been basically waiting all year long for this playoff matchup to play Derrick Henry against the Texans is
the
really
fact that they lead the league and they have the best yards per carry in the NFL this year.
Well,
everyone just throws out this version of the Texans and just says, hey, it's the 2020 through 2022 Texans.
Exactly. And Derrick Henry runs for 700 yards against them. So
okay. Good to know. I'm just glad I didn't miss anything.
No, you didn't miss anything. Not at all. There's nothing else out there. No, and that's all I've got there. But we can do the running backs now. And Phil, how are you going to build out running backs?
Yep. So I think that Kyron Williams and Christian McCaffrey are both good enough plays objectively that I'm going to be loaded up on them in tournaments, regardless of high ownership. So I'm really starting my lineups and building my lineups around at least one of them in pretty much every lineup. And I'm getting to some guys who might go overlooked. I think Rachaad White is 7,000 now on DraftKings. I think that 7 at the beginning of his price is going to psychologically make people hesitate a little bit, especially because Tony Pollard is right below him at 6,700. Kyron is above him at 75. So I think people are either going to go down or go up and leave him underexposed. And Green Bay is a great matchup for running backs. We saw Isaiah Pacheco a couple weeks ago, like steamroll their defense. Saquon got on track against them on Monday night. And White's role is just awesome. He's out there for like 85% of the snaps in every single pass route at this point. And I did mention that I like Jordan Love and his receivers. So Rachaad White coming back the other way makes a lot of sense. If we just kind of play on how Tampa Bay should attack Green Bay and how Green Bay should attack Tampa Bay, it's logical. And then we need to wait and see on Raheem Mostert at 7,100. Devin Achane is not certain to play. He was out of practice with a toe injury. That would obviously raise Mostert's profile a little bit, but even with Achane active, Mostert has cleared 20 carries in 3 of his last 4. He has touchdown equity that no other running back in the league has. I would like it if Tyreek Hill is cleared and can play, because we saw that offense kind of go off the rails a little bit when Hill was out of the game last week. But the Jets are a run funnel because their pass defense is so good. I think that all favors Mostert, and the Dolphins are big favorites. And then, Jeff, you mentioned Chuba Hubbard. I'm putting him here just because he's like a direct price pivot off of Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah.
And he doesn't get the pass catching volume, but 48 carries in the last 2 games. The Falcons are a pretty neutral matchup for running backs. We know Bryce Young can't pass it, so they're going to do everything that they can to load Hubbard up again. If he does manage to find the end zone and run for 100 yards, and Ezekiel Elliott plays like a 30-something-year-old, a week after having 30 touches, I think that Hubbard could separate.
You have other pivots, Devin?
Yeah, I think there's a couple guys. I think I talked a little bit about Saquon Barkley in the matchup against New Orleans earlier in the cash game section. So I think he's a guy that you could certainly look at. Going down a little bit, I think if Isaiah Pacheco misses, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is at least intriguing because Kansas City should be able to just have a lead. There's a bit of a narrative that Patrick Mahomes, because he was crying and whining and yelling and screaming, may just come out and throw for 1,000,000 yards this week. But I don't know that I buy into that. I think that offense is pretty inept. But the other guy that I'll mention, Deontay Foreman. So I just want to attack Cleveland. I think a lot of people are still off of them, and I think that finding ways to do that is certainly going to be under the radar. And he's $5,000. Certainly not a player that's going to be in like my core build, but a guy that could be a pivot off of Justin Fields or some other combination, because I'm gonna have a Chicago guy in almost every lineup I built this week, I think.
This is where I'm going to play Homer and say James Cook. James Cook's coming off of multiple very strong performances, playing in that Dallas-Buffalo game, a pivot off of maybe some of the other plays that people will be on in that game. I don't know how popular he will be, but he's seeing more usage through the passing game. He was a key last week against Kansas City. So that I think that is a good pivot. Breece Hall, and we kind of talked a little bit about him, but in a PPR format, he has the potential to catch 8 to 10 passes because that's how their offense functions with Zach Wilson at quarterback. And then I think that's Aaron Jones, maybe. A.J. Dillon broke his hand at the end of the game against the Giants, or broke his thumb maybe, but they're talking about him being potentially injured and Jones potentially coming back. And so we talk about the pass game pivot off of that. Aaron Jones could see some involvement in the pass game there. If A.J. Dillon is limited at all, that could be with him coming back if he is healthy, if he is able to go in this matchup. And I know we've talked casually about that being a kind of a low-key fun matchup to target. So those would be my other plays. We can move to wide receivers though. And Devin, how can you build out this wide receiver lineup?
What do we do if Chris Olave misses? Is it Alvin Kamara? Like maybe it's Alvin Kamara and we just add him to the running backs that we mentioned. But I mean, they're still without, what is it, Rashid Shaheed too?
Yeah, Derek Carr throws for 125 yards is what happens if Chris Olave.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a possibility. But like, who's going to catch those 125? Because
Bowden with 4 catches for 32 yards.
Yeah, which I would take. Okay, so wide receivers. I like Jalen Waddle this week at 74. The way to beat the Jets is in the slot. And, they have 2 of the best outside corners in the NFL with Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. But, Waddle had over 100 yards in their first matchup. Tyreek Hill is less than 100%. It sounds like he's going to go, but you don't really know based off of his ankle injury. So I think Waddle's in an intriguing spot, and a name that we really haven't mentioned. CeeDee Lamb, I think, is always in play. Buffalo, Jeff, as you know, has had their ups and downs against the pass this season. When they're good, they're good. When they're bad, look out. And I think he's a decent stacking partner with Dak Prescott. Rashee Rice, price is expensive, which is going to prevent a lot of people from taking him. But there is that narrative, like I mentioned, that maybe the Patriots throw the ball quite a bit. They should be able to move the ball however they want against New England this week. Amari Cooper, I already mentioned. And I don't know. I'm struggling with this one, and it's a name that I already mentioned, but Devontae Parker, if he plays, is at least intriguing. He didn't play last week, but in Bailey Zappi's first game, he had 9 targets. And at 3,500 to get 9 targets, like, is at least worth something. He's been awful all year, but he's the number one guy right now because, I mean, Juju was de facto the number one guy this past week, but it's a good pivot off of Ezekiel Elliott because Elliott as a runner is not going to get his value isn't all there. It's mostly through the passing game. So every reception that Parker could catch could be a point that's taken away from Elliott. I don't know. I'm scraping at the barrel.
Philly, do you have other plays?
Yeah, so I think I talk about Brandon Ayuk every week, and usually he does just enough not to appear in a first place GPP lineup. But Arizona matches up with him pretty poorly. He's not going to get that massive target volume that's going to get you to a 30-point game. But the last time that these two teams met, Ayuk had 148 yards and a touchdown on only 6 targets. And it's kind of the same beatable secondary that it was. I don't see that they have anyone that can contain him. And, he definitely has that 100-yard multi-touchdown upside, even without the target volume of some of these other top receivers. So Ayuk is one. Cooper Kupp, this is where I would rather play him than in cash games. It's not like we're sneaking him past anyone in this matchup. Everyone wants to attack Washington. But I don't think he's going to catch the same ownership as Nakua. He's kind of got that broken down old man vibe that turns people off in tournaments. I wish he wasn't coming off of such a good game because he might have actually snuck past people. But I think that it was encouraging that he showed that he still has that ceiling game in him last week. And we've seen wide receiver duos get there on Washington this year. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith in week 8, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett in week 10. So there is enough room for both Kupp and Nakua, one to have a very solid game and one to go completely nuts and win you a tournament. Outside of that, I'm tempted to say Terry McLaurin as a bring back in that game. He had a 0 in his last game before the bye, which is frightening. And it's kind of like a mystery. As many fantasy points as Sam Howell has managed to compile this season, McLaurin never gets there. But we saw Odell Beckham get behind that Rams defense for a long one last week. They do allow the 5th most normalized fantasy points per game to enemy wide receivers over the last 5 weeks, and no one wants to play McLaurin anymore. So I think that's a good play. Speaking of normalized fantasy points per game, real quick, our buddy Dan Hendry, who's been on the show a couple of times this year, he released a great feature on Football Guys this week that'll help you for the fantasy playoffs and for DFS. So if you search for articles by Dan Hendry, it's called Fantasy Playoff Matchups and Custom SOS. And he built a little app in there so that you could see normalized fantasy points, which basically rates a defense's fantasy points given up against what they're expected to give up based on strength of opponent, and gives you a better true read on how good that defense is than raw fantasy points allowed does. So shout out to Dan. He did a really great job with that. And one more name that I'm going to throw out there, Trey Palmer at 3,100. Chris Godwin missed practice again today. So Trey Palmer at 3,100, if Godwin doesn't play in this game, I think he becomes cash viable and a strong play in GPPs. He's athletic, explosive. He high points the ball. He usually gets like 4 to 6 targets a week, even with Evans and Godwin. And he kind of has like a sneaky 1x floor built in. So if you could get him to, 8 targets, 9 targets, I would be excited to put Trey Palmer in my lineup.
Excited. Good luck.
We're going to do some bottom of the barrel scraping here a little bit to kind of clean it out. One, monitor the CJ Stroud situation if he does clear concussion protocol, and if Nico Collins is out. Xavier Hutchinson at min price 3,000 I think might be a fun wild card. There's a couple other plays. Maybe Noah Brown might be a more popular play in that one, but that's just a pivot they can step into against what should be a good matchup against a poor Tennessee pass defense. We talked about Rams. Demarcus Robinson he's at 3,600. He's got touchdowns in each of the last 2 games, 10 targets last week. I think you'll have a lot of, Phil just laid out the case very well for Cooper Kupp there. Buka Naku would be very popular. If you really want to go for it in a tournament and have a pivot off both of those guys in that matchup, Demarcus Robinson really looks like he has solidified that third receiver role. That, as in the Rams, we know that they play 3 receivers pretty heavily. Michael Wilson going against the 49ers is supposed to be back, and Hollywood Brown is a little bit banged up, and I think he's been missing practice. Michael Wilson had 2 touchdowns the last time that they played the 49ers. We know that they're going to be chasing that entire game, so that's 3,300. And then Kadarius Toney, 3,100. I'm sure that the entire Chiefs are mad at him, but at the same time, wouldn't it be just the thing if Kadarius Toney has a touchdown or 2? That's the other thing kind of thinking there. Just scraping the bottom of the barrel, different directions you can head as you fill out a tournament lineup and you get all the really good players in there, and you need just kind of one of those guys to fill out the bottom of your lineup. Let's move to tight ends. Is there anything interesting at all for GPP purposes at tight end?
Yeah, Cole Kmet, I think, is interesting. Like I said, attack the safeties that are non-existent for Cleveland. Travis Kelce, I think, is interesting, 7,600. The price has come down enough. I think that it's certainly on a week where, we talked about Trey McBride. He's fine. But the gap between the David Njoku and Travis Kelce range is smaller than I think it's been. So if you don't go with Tyreek Hill or you don't go with Christian McCaffrey, you can easily afford a Kelce this week. And, he still has, I believe he still has a big game or 2 left in him, whether it's this week or not, I don't really know. But, and then a lot of the same guys that we've already talked about. So the going cheap with the Chigakonkwo or the Tucker Kraft or these Tyler Conklin, it's just a bunch of non-exciting names that we're just throwing out there.
There are no Trey Palmers, that's for sure.
I mean, Taysom Hill becomes somewhat interesting if Olave misses, maybe. But his health is also in question. He's 5,500. His price is expensive, but who are they going to throw the ball to? I just can't figure it out.
Dalton Kincaid has a shoulder injury, and if he misses, Dawson Knox at 2,700 in that Dallas Buffalo game might be a little bit interesting in a GPP lineup. Phil, do you have any other ones to add?
Yeah, if Kincaid misses, I would probably even consider Dawson Knox in cash for that price. I think that the Buffalo tight end is definitely a position I was looking to target. I think because Kincaid's been limited in back-to-back that he'll be out there, and I don't think that he'll be very popular because I think that people are looking at Dawson Knox coming back last week and Kincaid failing to put up his usual stat line. But he still ran a route on 86% of the dropbacks, 19% target share, which is great for a tight end. His target depth was back down a bit like it was in the season when he was playing alongside Knox, which was disappointing. But I think it's either way, a good way to gain some high upside, low-owned exposure to the best game on the slate. And then, we mentioned McBride a bunch of times. I can't fit him in cash games, so I'm certainly going to be playing him in GPPs. I'm not sure how he isn't at least George Kittle's price, probably 6K. I mean, the target volume is exceptional. you mentioned a tough matchup, but like last time we saw him, he was like cooking Minka Fitzpatrick. So I don't know that it matters. He's good and he's high volume. So Trey McBride, regardless of the percent owned, again, I'll look to get different elsewhere.
One, I know we don't talk about defense in this show, but I need to. Saints defense this week is intriguing. Tommy DeVito has been sacked 18% of dropbacks, and the league average is 6%. So you could do much worse than the Saints.
Yeah. That means it's time for our stacks. So, Phil, do you have a favorite stack of the week?
For sure. And I was just going to say on that call, Devin, he was miraculously not sacked last week. So that 18% rate,
I think it was like 25 or 26 before last week, and the league average is 6. And the second worst team besides the Giants is at 10. So like maybe he won't get sacked again and the regression will start, but maybe he just holds on to the ball way too long and their offensive line is horrible.
Yeah, excellent call. And I'm sorry, Jeff.
You're good.
I stepped on you there. Are we doing stacks or are we doing value plays?
Stacks are next up. Our favorite stacks for this week.
Okay, so stacks. So you guys know I like Jordan Love. So I'm going to go with Jordan Love. Pick a Green Bay receiver. Let's say Dobbs, Tucker Kraft, Rashad White coming back. And you inspired me on Will Levis. I think you could do Levis, Hopkins, Chig. I think regardless of which Houston quarterback starts, Dalton Schultz is coming back. And if Collins is out and Dell is out, I think he becomes like the automatic target. So now you have this Will Levis, DeAndre Hopkins, 2 tight end lineup, and you could just chalk the rest of it out and play the highest owned, most popular guys. Hope they hit, and if your game stack hits, you're in good shape.
Matt Stafford, Cooper Kupp, Terry McLaurin.
Fair.
Yeah.
Do you want to go Puka Nacua in there too? I think Stafford throws for 350 and 3, so I think there's enough to go around.
GPP play, go with the MVP candidate, Brock Purdy, ride Deebo Samuel to continue his hot streak, and then bring that back with Trey McBride. And that would be, I think, my favorite stack. Time for discount plays now. How are we going to fit all these studs in our lineup? Let's do our discount plays of the week. Devin, who is your discount play of the week? Do you have another surprise up your sleeve?
I've hit on the last 2. So Parker Washington scored a touchdown last week and wasn't great. I mean, he had 11 points, but for minimum price, he was fine. And then Elijah Moore the week before. I'm going, assuming he plays, I'm going Devontae Parker. I think the 9 targets are intriguing. I think Bailey Zappi might be a better quarterback than Mac Jones. He's certainly not worse, but I think a lot of people are going to be looking at what he did last week and throwing to Ezekiel Elliott, and I certainly think it's probable that he goes that route again. But maybe he just did that because Parker wasn't in the lineup, and he throws more his way this week. So see if we can go 3 for 3.
I'm going to make it interesting and take the other side of that, and I'm going to say if Demario Douglas plays, it'll be Douglas that has the good game, regardless of if Parker plays or not, because I think Demario Douglas might be good, and I know that Devontae Parker is not.
Fair.
Demarcus Robinson scores again, but my favorite discount play is going to be Wan'Dale Robinson with 3,700 coming off that Monday night pricing. He looked good on Monday night, and I was really impressed the way that he played against the Packers, going up against the Saints. I think that Wan'Dale Robinson is going to be a focal point of the Giants' offense, and at 3,700, that's a really, really nice price point for him. That's all we got tonight. Make sure to like and subscribe. Devin, why don't you lead us out?
No, thanks everyone. Week 15. So we have two more weeks of the show. We don't do a week 18 show. So enjoy us while we're here because it'll be a long 9 months or however long it takes for the season to come back. So give this video a like, subscribe, do all that. Give us a comment. No one's guessed Phil's dog's name. So that $100 prize is still out there for whoever gets it.
We're gonna have to start dropping hints on
Nope.
Phil's dog's name there. Nope, no hint. All right. See you, everybody.